Having traveled to the era of slavery, you've become the youngest slave owner with a slave owner's handbook in your mind. However, this handbook requires a slave's comprehensive rating to be above 20 to unlock. The old Jewish man is standing beside you. Not disturbing him, but it's not because he has any patience, especially towards this kind of young slave owner who might die in a few days or become a debt slave. Have you chosen yet? Young man, they are actually much better looking than they are now, as long as you go home and get the money. If you just want to look, then quickly step aside like those lower-class free people. After saying that, the old Jewish man seemed to think of something and added, but with a more ill intention. If your oasis still has water. Now he is starting to suspect that this little slave owner doesn't even have a single original stone left. If it were a great slave owner, the old Jewish man would abandon his dignity without hesitation and try to curry favor, but in front of him is a piece of trash like you, so making a few sarcastic remarks becomes natural. Hearing the urging, you frown slightly. You've been wandering around the slave market all morning. And this is the last slave stall, the only one with female slaves, and your last hope. If you can't find a slave who can reach a score of 20 and that you can afford, then when the blood moon arrives, you will definitely have a narrow escape from death. Just when you felt the pressure was so great that you were suffocating, you suddenly saw a number flash by, and then immediately hid back behind the tempting thighs of two female slaves. You widened your eyes and slowly raised your hand, from a terrified slave girl to another slave girl who looked clear-headed. Then the direction of your finger stopped between the two. The old Jewish man followed the direction of your finger and looked over. Two tall female slaves also made way, revealing a short figure hidden behind them. Realizing that she was being pointed at, the slave girl's body began to tremble. The burlap robe on her body, although a little ragged, was still intact, covering her body well. This was in stark contrast to the other female slaves. It seemed that this slave girl had not been a slave for long. From her exposed, slender ankles, one could see how malnourished her body was. Her chest was flat, and her face was dirty, making it impossible to see her appearance, but you could see on the right side of her face, near her eye, a dark red bruise, obviously a scar that could not be healed. The old Jewish man's face instantly fell. Sure enough, he chose the cheapest one. Although he said at the beginning that the price of a female slave was from 5 to 20 original stones, it was clear that a female slave in this condition could only sell for 5 original stones, because in this batch of female slaves, there was no worse one, whether in appearance, figure, especially the parts that could be used for pleasure. After wasting so much of his time, he actually only bought the cheapest female slave. Although this slave was picked up by him on the way of his business trip and hasn't even been fed a meal yet, could be considered a costless profit. Okay, young man. 5 original stones. The old Jewish man turned away and stretched out his hand towards you. While you were rummaging through your shriveled original stone bag, you looked at the selected slave girl. Confirming again, yes, this slave girl's rating was indeed as high as 23. Your gaze still fell on that somewhat panicked and fearful petite figure. You were pleasantly surprised. But you still suppressed the corners of your mouth, lest the slave owner dig into it and then raise the price on the spot. You originally came to try your luck. If it didn't work out, you would have to find another way out. After all, in your original stone bag, there were only 6 original stones. But now it was clear that you had discovered a buried talent. You really picked up a bargain. If you wanted to reach a score of 23, under normal circumstances, you would need at least 3 slaves with a price as high as 15 original stones. Sure enough, even in the face of faint hope, facts are always right. Just as you were secretly rejoicing, you saw the old Jewish man heading towards the slave girl, very roughly pulling her out. Now she is my slave. Seeing the painful look on the slave girl's face, and the tearful eyes that showed because of the pain, you frowned and shouted to the old Jewish man, "No, not yet. Black-hearted profiteer, it seems you're buying a slave for the first time." The old Jewish man pushed the slave girl in front of you. Then he tore open a bit of the slave girl's robe, revealing a rune with a strange beauty on the small piece of skin on her back. The surrounding area was still a little red, as if it had just been branded on with a branding iron. Seeing this rune mark, you thought of the surrounding walls of your oasis. There seemed to be similar patterns on the walls. Put your blood on it. She is completely yours, protected by the code. No one can take your slave. And if the slave dares to be disloyal for even a moment, she will immediately suffer unbearable pain. You were just wondering why the slave owner's handbook in your mind didn't. Still no reaction. Could it be because the process isn't complete yet? He pondered. He bit his finger, letting blood drip onto the slave blood crest revealed on the girl's back. Unexpectedly, the instant the blood was absorbed by the blood crest, the slave girl let out a sound of exertion. Then, uncontrollably, she fell towards you. You hurriedly caught the girl's swaying body, feeling her trembling. At the same time, You saw the girl's eyes roll back in pain, and the dark red marks on her face all turned bright red from the pain. The old Jewish man's voice echoed, "Young man, once she learns how to be truly and constantly loyal to you, you'll get a reward. Usually it doesn't take too long. Even the slowest only need to wait for the sun to rise twice. These slaves are, after all, smarter than those born into it." Looking at the girl in pain before him, he felt a strange mix of emotions. After all, he wasn't from this world. Having traveled here, he couldn't truly treat a living person as a talking tool. It was at this moment that the slave owner's handbook finally reacted. Focusing his mind, he saw the handbook finally open. Several lines of text appeared on the page. Slave acquired, 1. Binding slave loyalty. Progress, 1%. 2%. Loyalty mostly depended on the slave girl adapting. Just like the old Jewish man said. "Oh, young man." The old Jewish man's voice sounded again. You raised your head, looking at that face with its knowing smile, and a hint of shrewdness in his eyes. "In 10 days is the triumphal festival slave auction. You can come then. All slaves from defeated city-states, even high-ranking nobles who have fallen, hee. I'll also have some good things you need. If you can endure the blood crest, you'll definitely need something to relax." After saying this, the old Jewish man glanced askance at Milia in your arms. He was already calculating how to say it. If the slave owner, wearing tattered clothes, were to appear before him again, in order to get her to welcome the cheap female slave. Take out 5 original stones, buy yourself some original, the cost price of medicine. You guessed the old Jewish man's intentions. You ignored him, obviously not wanting to sell yourself the original stone and still wanting to make a profit later. But you did take note of the triumphal festival slave auction in 10 days. After all, the slaves in this job market were too ancient and rustic. Looking at the binding progress increasing slowly, you once again focused your gaze on the chest and face of the girl in your arms. At this moment, the slave girl was already waking up from the pain. But she was still biting her lip, seemingly enduring the pain. "What's your name?" You thought for a moment and asked. Perhaps increasing communication and understanding could accelerate the binding with the slave girl in your arms. The girl's eyes finally focused on you. Her voice trembled with the pain in her body. My name is Milia." "All right, Milia. Starting today, you are my slave." "Yes, master." The moment she uttered the respectful title, Milia felt that the pain brought about by the slave crest, at the end of the endless desert, was finally coming to an end. After passing through 2 lush oases with many slaves, one belonging to a young widow, and the other belonging to someone who coveted you, you finally saw your third of an acre. To call it an oasis was actually not much different from a dune, apart from that Zhou well and the broken wooden house. Also, the remnants of the 3 sand spirit sword towers showed that this was once owned land. And as the outermost oasis of the outer city, most of the border was merged with the dangerous wilderness, and the desert outside the outer city 69%. The progress adjustment was getting slower and slower. It was called a return. If it went on like this, I'm afraid that the binding couldn't be completed before the blood crest. What you needed was to quickly open the slave owner's handbook. Find a way to safely get through the blood crest. This couldn't go on. Turning your head, you looked at Milia behind you. You saw Milia still painfully biting her lip. Her small feet stepped on the sand, leaving footprints that were shallow and deep, weak and powerless. Obviously, Milia's body had been pushed to its limit. "Let's go back safely first." Her body was too exhausted right now, so you didn't have enough brain power to think of a solution. When the heat of the earth was no longer scorching, you pushed open the door of the wooden house. The creaking of the door opening made people's hair stand on end. Milia sat down on the tattered wooden bed, finally catching her breath. Walking to the large pottery vat whose pattern had been worn away, you took out the sheepskin water bag. You were about to pour water, but you discovered that the vat had long been dry. Immediately taking out the last original stone, you prepared to throw it into the Zhou well to satisfy your parched throat. But after thinking about it, you put the original stone back. This was your last original stone to be used prudently. "I won't spend this primal stone for now. Even with the stimulation, I won't die of thirst. Leaving it might save my life in an emergency." Then you make up your mind. Better to suffer a little longer, at least until I truly unlock my slave owner's handbook, and find a way to get more primal stones. In your heart, you can't help but complain. Before time traveling, I lacked money, and now I lack primal stones. What a miserable life. Milia. That's when you discover Milia is gone. Could it be she didn't follow me in? Suddenly alarmed, you walk to the door, open it, and look outside. The wooden door makes another scalp-tingling creaking sound. You don't see Milia anywhere. Could it be, master? Just as some bad guesses enter your mind, you suddenly hear a timid voice coming from a corner of the house. You look towards the sound. And only then do you realize that Milia is curled up in a corner of this empty house, a tattered cloth covered in dust, making her almost blend in with the decaying wood in the shadows. Milia's eyes are filled with fear. As she looks at you, seemingly worried about being, so she was hiding. You finally feel relieved. That was a false alarm. Looking at Milia, curled up in the corner like a frightened little rabbit, you frown and begin to think about what to do to improve the progress of her affection. Recalling the old Jewish man's words, you begin to think quickly in your mind. The loyalty gained from slaves through slave service is essentially a passive loyalty, established through pain, making the slave's loyalty to the master an instinct. So, could I use a method to increase active loyalty to speed up the progress of affection? Like affection points in a gal game, like patting her head or something. You begin to recall your rich gaming experience, then try to get up, carefully observing Milia's expression, and slowly approach Milia. You gently reach out your hand, but when you observe those eyes full of fear, and your hand, after getting within a certain distance, Milia closes her eyes as if resigned to her fate. You decisively withdraw your hand and temporarily abandon the idea. Obviously, the head-patting method won't work, and now there's no water or oil, so more dialogue interaction is not realistic either, right? Although there's no water, there is food, like flour, and looking at Milia's body so thin, she probably hasn't had a full meal in a long time. You get up, walk to the wooden box, and take out a peach and a small bag of flour. Without saying a word, you walk out of the house. Is he going to start doing that kind of thing? Milia closes her eyes tightly, every inch of her skin enveloped in anxiety. She remembers the miserable appearance of the slaves she saw being tortured in public in her city-state. She heard that slaves would only be more miserable if they were taken back to the oasis by slave owners, especially female slaves, because female slaves are born to be used as tools for venting. Just as she hears the door closing, Milia, immersed in fear, slowly opens her tightly closed eyes. Her gray-blue pupils scan the room. The room no longer has the sound that made her heart tremble, only beams of light formed by the setting sun shining into the ventilation holes. Milia curls her body even tighter, burying her head between her legs, and begins to anxiously guess what terrible things her master will do to her later. Until the sound of the door opening, but this time, before Milia's heart could be suspended, it was soothed by a pleasant fragrance. She opens her big gray-blue eyes again, blinking, and looks eagerly at the pottery pot in your hand. She can't help but swallow very carefully, naturally afraid of being heard swallowing, so that the master notices her thoughts that a slave shouldn't have, and then receiving a whipping. Finally finished, you pick up the utensils that don't exist in this world at all, chopsticks made from two whittled twigs, insert the chopsticks into the sand in the pottery pot, and rummage around, quickly picking out a flatbread, one side charred black, and the other golden brown. This is a sand flatbread made using a cooking method unique to the desert. Indeed, in the eyes of most slave owners and even free orators, this sand flatbread is made quite terribly. But in your eyes, this is, after all, made by yourself, containing the fruits of your labor, so it looks satisfying no matter how you look at it. You turn all the sand flatbreads out of the sand, putting the better ones in the first pottery plate, and the worse ones in the other pottery plate. Then you place the first plate in front of Milia. Are you hungry? This is your dinner. For dinner, Milia looked incredulously at the sand cake on the plate on the ground. Subconsciously, she stuck out her little tongue and licked her dry lips. Then her small face revealed a confused expression. So she could get food without crying, and it was free food. She recalled the past few days after being briefed by the old Jew. Each time, the female slaves had to cry loudly before the old Jew impatiently threatened them with sand balls. Sand balls were made of sand, bran, and some sticky, rotten meat baked together. Her master was truly kind, but could her master really be this kind? Looking at the sand cake in front of her, Milia still dared not reach out to take it, but the pain in her abdomen intensified. Second law of slaves. A slave must obey the commands issued by the master, unless the command conflicts with the first law of slaves. Although Milia's heart was still filled with unease, in order to avoid the slave punishment, she plucked up her courage and raised her hand, reaching for the sand cake. The first bite was still cautious, but the taste of the sand cake completely awakened Milia's body's instinctual needs. She briefly forgot her unease and fear, and began to eat faster and faster. The indifference on your face also changed as the sand cake was eaten by Milia, revealing a hint of surprise. As expected, your guess was correct. The bonding progress instantly went from 69% to 91%. When you looked at Milia again, you saw that not even a grain of flour was left on the plate. "Do you want more?" you said in a gentle tone, and you could also see that Milia was no longer as afraid of you as before. At least her body was no longer trembling. Milia blinked, then shook her head. "Thank you, kind master." Hearing this, you realized that Milia's little belly was already bulging, round and full. You then raised your hand again, starting to try to make contact once more. This time, Milia only dodged slightly, but when your large hand stroked her head, she inexplicably felt a sense of security. The master's hand was so soft, and her little head even unconsciously began to lean closer to your soft, large hand. While you stroked Milia's little head, you watched the bonding progress increase rapidly, until it reached 100%. It was no longer just a surface-level thing, and the ancient slave owner's handbook in your mind began to flip through rapidly. The first page showed text and images resembling a guide, formerly Milia. Then it flipped to the last page, which looked like a route map-like chart with countless pages in between, filled with a lot of blank space. The slave guide has been unlocked. Rating reached 23 points. 20-point slave owner rating reward is being calculated. Reward, original honesty. Reward, title draw chance becomes 1. You laboriously moved the big peach tree to the door, wedged it against the door, and then picked up a thick, long wooden stick. This was to prepare for the arrival of the night. On your first night after transmigrating, you were attacked by a skeleton undead. This body was already malnourished, and coupled with the fact that you were a corporate slave before transmigrating, you had no fighting experience, and even went to the gym rarely. You hadn't exercised for 5 or 6 years, and after transmigrating, you were thrown into a free-for-all fight. You risked your life to take down the skeleton. It was a 1-to-1 fight, so you made ample preparations before starting to study the guide in your mind. Seeing you pick up the stick, Milia's body tensed up again. Is the master going to punish me? Looking at the stick, Milia's face was full of worry. She had already begun to imagine the pain of the stick, hitting her body, and perhaps even more cruel forms of punishment. She stared at the stick until you placed it on the table beside you. Only then did Milia dare to breathe deeply. As time passed, Milia realized that you were not abusing her. As she had imagined, the master is preparing to defend against the undead of the night. At this moment, reason overcame the fear brought about by fear. Milia thought of your actions just now and suddenly understood. The master is a kind master, giving me free food. A sense of guilt generated by misunderstanding you suddenly surged into Milia's heart. When Milia quietly looked at you again, the taste in her gray-blue eyes almost disappeared. Title draw chance. You watched the rapidly spinning wheel gradually slow down, and you also clearly saw what was written on it. What was written on it? Indulgent titles, snake-charming titles, silly titles, conquering titles. You were confused about the prospects of these titles, but the title draw chance was not just once, and you were not worried about missing any. You just hoped that you could draw one that could help you. The wheel speed of the blood title slowed down and eventually stopped at. The serpent charm title appeared. On the yellowed paper, one's own information resurfaced. Title obtained, Thrifty Slave Owner. Thrifty. The serpent charm title actually starts with Thrifty Slave Owner. What does it mean? Title, Thrifty Slave Owner. Attribute, serpent charm effect, kills undead. You have a 10% chance to obtain a certain amount of primal essence depending on the strength of the undead. Introduction. You can always save some wealth from unexpected places. As soon as you saw the effect of this title, your eyes lit up. Killing undead yields primal essence. This is something that is originally impossible in this world. Primal essence can only be obtained from scarce primal essence mines. The primal essence mines are monopolized by the monarch. Slave owners on Scorched Grain Day must use grain to exchange for primal essence from the monarch. Moreover, primal essence is directly tied to survival value. Water sources depend on giving Zhou Xingjin. Primal essence must be invested to obtain them. The defense facilities on the oasis must also be maintained and used with primal essence. Primal essence is the hard currency of this apocalyptic century, and is also a necessity for slave owners to continue the oasis. The undead at night were originally only a burden for slave owners, but now, the undead have become a resource for me, a resource that can produce primal essence. If I can make good use of the 2 nights before the arrival of the blood moon, that is, tonight and tomorrow night, then I will definitely have a large primal essence income that can be used to repair and activate all the spirit-slaying sword tower ruins on my oasis. Oh, just then, a wolf's howl rang out outside the house, followed by the sound of porcelain shattering. Desert wolves will howl in groups when dusk is about to end and the desert is completely shrouded in darkness. You didn't have time to continue looking at Milia's slave profile, so you hurriedly walked outside. There are only 2 nights left until the blood moon. You must seize every opportunity to obtain more primal essence. Strengthen your oasis. The desert sunset has already fallen below the horizon, leaving only a faint glimmer. You look at the ruins of these 3 spirit-slaying sword towers, walked to the one with the relatively slightest damage, and finally began to take out the newly obtained, still warm primal essence, placing one after another into the energy compartment inside the spirit-slaying sword tower. The sand under your feet seemed to have life in an instant, flowing towards the spirit-slaying sword tower. The sand sometimes looked like a large group of ants, and sometimes it gathered into a long snake. 3 pieces, 7 pieces, 9 pieces. Your hand holding the last piece of primal essence paused. The repair of the spirit-slaying sword tower requires 1 to 20 pieces of primal essence depending on the extent of the damage. You chose the spirit-slaying sword tower with the slightest degree of damage. It shouldn't be damaged so severely, right? Your heart sank, but there was still no turning back. You stuffed in the last piece of primal essence. Under your nervous gaze, finally the rustling sound began to reverberate. A large amount of sand surged like waves. The spirit-slaying sword tower instantly rose to its full height. The restored spirit-slaying sword tower no longer looked like the blurry ruins it was before. Instead, it became a sharp-edged triangular prism. A white sphere of light condensed at the very top, especially brilliant in the dark night. Like a vein, a clear curved pattern of azure light formed and quickly extended from top to bottom. At this moment, the remaining glow of the sunset completely faded, and a ghostly darkness enveloped every corner of the desert. You heard a sound of something breaking out from afar. A pale white ghoul appeared on the desert, wandering aimlessly within range. Why isn't it attacking? Based on fragments of memory, you roughly know the attack range of the spirit-slaying sword tower. But the expected automatic attack of the spirit-slaying sword tower on the undead did not occur. And just then, another ghoul emerged. It discovered you exposed outside and simultaneously emitted a rattling sound of bones. This is how ghouls conceal themselves. The first ghoul obviously heard the call of its companion and quickly locked onto you. Watching the 2 ghouls slowly walk towards you, your scalp felt a little numb, but you didn't give up directly. Instead, you began to think with all your might about which step went wrong. Your tightly furrowed brows finally relaxed. When you transmigrated, all the spirit-slaying sword towers were already damaged. You had never used them yourself. Finally, from the fragments of memory, you found the step you had overlooked. To activate the spirit-slaying sword tower, you still need a primal essence. 1 more primal essence. And you happen to have 1. You immediately took out that 1 primal essence. Not long ago, you endured your thirst, and saved this one. Now it's finally coming in handy. Master, come back quickly. You'll die. Just as you were about to put the primal essence into the compartment, you suddenly heard an anxious voice from behind, even with a hint of crying. You turned your head, and saw that it was actually Milia who had run out of the wooden house, pulling on the corner of your sleeve. You didn't expect Milia to actually run out and call you back. You put the primal essence in, picked up Milia, and hurriedly ran towards the wooden house. At the same time, the spirit-slaying sword tower instantly came to life. The white light sphere became even more dazzling, storing energy throughout its life. After a moment, a killing sword condensed and took shape in the tower. Just as you shut the door after rushing out, you heard the sound of bones breaking. Climbing onto the table and looking through the vent at the top, you saw the second hollow. It had already been shot to pieces, but the desert night never lacked hollows. A constant stream of slaughter burst forth, while the spirit-killing sword tower continuously repeated the cycle of accumulating energy and firing. The corners of your mouth slightly curved upward. At this moment, the hollows in your eyes no longer made you feel your scalp tingle as they once did. Instead, you even felt a sense of fondness, especially when you saw the hollows, moving their slender, pale legs, one in front of the other, as they walked toward the spirit-killing sword tower. They were simply too cute. This wasn't some kind of hollow. It was clearly a walking primitive. "Thank you, Milia," you said, jumping down from the wooden table. You dusted off the sand from your hands, feeling much better, and looked at Milia, who was standing beside the table. Milia smiled shyly and said, hearing the words "thank you," especially when they were directed at her. Milia couldn't believe her ears. She quickly glanced up at you before immediately lowering her head again. "This is what Milia should do, master," Milia said, feeling a momentary sense of confusion. It was as if she was still a free person, but now she was a slave. How could a slave possibly receive gratitude from their master? Could it be that she had actually done something wrong? Was her master deliberately saying this and was about to punish her? The thought arose. Milia felt a bit flustered, but before she could even feel afraid, that large hand touched her head again. In the rapidly cooling night, the warmth of this hand gave Milia a sense of security that she hadn't felt in a long time. She couldn't help but try to welcome the touch of this hand, seeing Milia's frightened appearance. You patted Milia's head, then didn't say much else. Milia belonged to this world of slavery, so it was naturally impossible for her to accept your methods from the civilized world in a short period of time. It was impossible for her to develop a completely new personality after spending such a short time, or saying a few words, with you. To be safe, you moved the large water tank again. Arriving at the door, he also casually picked up the large wooden stick. He placed it at hand, but was completely without the feeling of tension. He even felt a hint of comfort, naturally because of the soul-slaying sword tower's continued energy firing that occasionally reached his ears, and the sound of skeletons shattering. It was time to take another look at his slave owner's handbook. Opening the handbook again with a thought, he went straight to the last page of the slave owner's handbook. The yellowed pages flipped rapidly, and the words on the last page appeared in his mind. 20 points settled. Original accomplishment, title draw attempts become 1, next settlement score requirement. 20-point rewards are already this good, what will the 50-point rewards be? He was quite satisfied with the frugal slave owner title he received this time and couldn't help but start to guess. What will the reward for reaching 50 points be? It made him a little itchy, but wanting to reach 50 points in a short time. The possibility was very small. If he wanted to buy a large number of slaves to gather enough rating points, then the money he had would definitely not be enough, unless he could find at least one more bargain, a slave that was even a little stronger than Milia. But this was obviously wishful thinking. He had to suppress the excitement in his heart, and he flipped the pages again. He came to the first page, Milia's illustration. Slave Milia, serial number 1, age adult. Binding progress 109%. Negative entries. Touched bitter scars -77. Loss of mothers. Psychological trauma -36. Insecurity. Heavy dependence -7. Positive entries. Fast learner +30. Sincere person +10. Careful +3. Special entry +100. Comprehensive score 23 + 2 is equal to 25 points. The first thing he noticed was that the binding progress had actually exceeded 100%. The second thing he noticed was the score. Milia's improvement had actually become 25, and those extra 2 points. Didn't they come from that exceeded 9%? Was it because he did not completely rely on the forced loyalty of slave service, but chose to treat Milia with kindness, so he broke the upper limit of the binding progress? And it would also add to the original score. Looking at the illustration again carefully after understanding, he immediately realized one thing in his heart. Buying Milia was not just a bargain, it was simply being hit by great luck again. Although Milia's temporary score was only 23 points, these negative entries could be eliminated. The positive entries, after some training, could obviously also be increased. If all the negative traits are eliminated, Milia's base rating will reach an astonishing 143. Adding the binding bonus and the positive traits that can be increased, it is simply immeasurable. But what is this special trait? It inexplicably added a full 100 points, seemingly sensing your ardor. On the left blank space of the figure, a line of bytes emerged, giving an introduction. Trait, introduction, no one knows what it is, including Milia herself, but it exists after all, like the eyes under the sandy sea. You look at this text introduction, not only confusing. How does it feel a little creepy? Looking back at the figure, the excited mood gradually calmed down. Among the negative traits, there is no clue about how to heal the scars, as well as Milia's lost mother. If she didn't die, wanting to find her is like looking for a needle in a haystack. The only thing that can be solved temporarily seems to be the trait of severe dependence on security, but this is far from enough. To reach 50 points, you also need to add new positive traits, which means you have to give Milia something new, but what to teach? You blew out half a candle. In this barbaric era, lying in bed at night is the best choice. At least it won't consume more energy. And it won't make you more thirsty. The cold at night makes your head clear enough. A mind keeps thinking about what to teach Milia to write so that it can quickly reach a score of 50 and unlock the next settlement reward, if it can be in the blood. Get the next reward, perhaps the spoils you get will be greatly improved. Mathematics, physics, or physiology. These don't seem suitable for Milia to learn, even with the mathematician's trait. It proves that Milia is definitely not stupid, and may even be very smart, but it is not something that can be achieved overnight. Especially in this era where even the Pythagorean theorem has not appeared. Exhale a cold breath. The poor quality linen blanket on the body was tightened a little, which made you miss again. How comfortable and warm your own down comforter used to be, outside the house there is still continuous. The sound of the sand spirit sword tower continuing to energize, but you also heard a crackling sound of eating, seemingly the sound of teeth colliding. A trace of tension just rose in my heart, but after figuring out the source of the sound, it was Milia's frozen body trembling. The sound of teeth colliding, I was too focused just now, and I actually forgot about it. Milia, come here, let's sleep together. You beckoned to Milia, who was curled up in the corner. Milia opened her eyes, and her eyes shone slightly in the moonlight shining in from outside. Really, master? Of course, and in the future you can always be with me in the warm blanket. Otherwise you will definitely freeze to death. Fearing that Milia would not dare to come over, you said as gently as possible. In fact, Milia would not refuse at all, not only because it was too cold, but even vaguely saw her mother, that gentle face, also because after you said this, if you don't obey, you will not only violate the second rule of slaves, but also violate the third rule of slaves. On the premise of not violating the first and second rules, as the property of the slave owner, the slave must protect himself. Outside in the desert night, it will reach -20 degrees Celsius. Although there is a wall blocking it, the room will still be much below 0 degrees. Thinking of the negligence just now, you reminded again. In the future, if I forget to tell you, you have to come over to the warm place on the bed. Understand? I understand, master. Milia in the darkness cannot see the face at this time, you can only feel. That petite body gradually approached, and then climbed onto the bed very restrainedly. In order to ensure that Milia would not freeze, put it directly into your arms. The night is getting deeper and deeper, your breathing is steady, already fast asleep, but Milia in her arms still has her eyes wide open, looking out of the narrow ventilation hole, full of thoughts. Master! Really a kind master, inadvertently recalling the experience in the slave team. A trace of panic rose in my heart again. Milia quietly drilled deeper into your arms, and after confirming that she did not wake you up, only then did I breathe a sigh of relief. If my mother was at the triumphal festival slave auction, I wonder if the master would. Would he kindly buy Mom? A trace of expectation appeared in Milia's eyes, feeling the warmth in your arms. Enjoying the rare sense of security at this moment, she gradually closed her eyes, while at the same time you were in your sleep. The leaves in your mind rustled once again, and you opened your eyes as the low aluminum glow shone on your face. How does it feel like I just closed and opened my eyes and it's the next day? The last time I had such a deep sleep was probably in kindergarten. It's probably because my mind has been in a state of high tension ever since I transmigrated to this damn place, and I can finally get a solid night's sleep. Milia is still asleep, not yet awake, so you get out of bed on your own. The desert morning is still cold. Even your breath condenses into white mist. You take out a large fleece blanket from the wooden box and drape it over yourself to ward off the cold. Only then did you open the large water tank, walked out the door, and watched the rosy clouds dye the horizon. At the end of the desert, pale yellow like butter, fiery red like flames, and deep blue like an abyss interweave and reflect each other. Seeing the mess outside after a night, you can no longer suppress the corner of your mouth from turning up. Centered on the sand spirit sword tower that you activated, large areas of the sandy ground are covered with dense white bones. Looking around, it's all skeletal remains. With a primitive output rate of 10%, how much primitive essence will I be able to harvest? Just as you were about to go and collect the primitive essence one by one, you suddenly caught sight of a figure standing on a sand dune in the distance. Watching you, you immediately turned around and looked towards the direction of the Zalen oasis. Standing on that distant sand dune was Raoul, the son of the slave owner Zalen. It was him again. Your brow furrowed slightly. You almost forgot that this kid comes to scout the edge of your oasis every day. As for what he's scouting for, it's naturally to see if you're dead or not. Of course, his purpose isn't to kindly collect your corpse. But it's based on the Sand Spirit Sword Tower on your oasis, or more precisely, the Origin Energy Obelisk inside the Sand Spirit Sword Tower. Everyone within the city-state is bound by the power of the code. It's not like customary law, an unwritten code passed down orally, relying on consensus to maintain it, nor is it a written social contract carved on a stone tablet, but a truly existing mysterious power. Violating the code will be punished by that mysterious power. Some punishments are like the pain that slave runes bring to slaves, and some punishments are death. For example, entering another person's oasis without permission will result in excruciating torture until you leave the area. Another example is killing someone within the city-state's borders. The killer will be stopped by intense pain. Slave owners enjoy more rights brought by the code because they own an oasis. Free people have both rights and punishments. Slaves, on the other hand, have no rights and must abide by the slave rules, even in the desert. It can be said that under the protection of the code, slave owners are absolutely safe on their own oasis. Unless the slave owner is killed by the undead or dies for other reasons, then this oasis becomes unowned. Before the city-state sends someone to reclaim ownership of the oasis, there is a window of opportunity. The oasis loses the protection of the code, can be freely invaded by outsiders. You have nothing, and what you have now is most precious. Is the Origin Energy Obelisk of the Sand Spirit Sword Tower. Originally, the original owner's father purchased these 3 Origin Energy Obelisks at a high price. This is also one of the sources of the large debt. Nowadays, origin energy obelisks on the market are even more priceless. Looking at Raoul's fat body standing on the sand dune, you no longer feel as resentful as before. Instead, you just feel it's a bit comical and ridiculous that he's still daydreaming about your death. That's definitely impossible. Killing undead to get primitive essence is too shocking. If it really spreads, it's hard to imagine what kind of impact it will have. It's better to wait a bit. Anyway, the primitive essence is in the bones of those skeletons. As long as you act before the sand covers the bones, you'll be in time. Then you strolled around in a conspicuous place, making sure that Raoul could see you, and then walked back into the wooden house. Why isn't this undead dead yet? When Raoul saw your figure, his face instantly turned angry. As long as you're not dead for a day, then he has to get up early for a day and brave the morning cold. To come to this remote place to investigate. And when he saw the Sand Spirit Sword Tower standing tall, a hint of astonishment appeared on his face. And you've even repaired a Sand Spirit Sword Tower. As expected, what father said was right. Raoul thought of what his father had said before. He didn't take it seriously before, but now he deeply agrees. After waiting for a long time, Raoul didn't see you come out again and couldn't get any more information. Only then did he roll down the hill like a meatball and walk towards the Zalen oasis. On the fertile land of Zalen oasis, 5 male slaves and more than a dozen female slaves had already begun their day's work. And this also suits his twisted pleasure. Of course, any punishment cannot cause the slaves to be unable to work, otherwise it will be a loss of property. Passing by the youngest and the most beautiful female slave, Raoul raised his foot and kicked her hard in the chest. Seeing the female slave clutching her chest and falling to the ground in pain, Raoul's face showed a satisfied smile. The female slave struggled to get up and quickly hid in the corner next to her. None of the other slaves dared to come forward. Until Raoul's figure left, none of the other slaves dared to come forward, until Raoul's figure left. The slaves all breathed a sigh of relief. Father A. Zalen Sword Tower has been restored on that oasis. Walking up to the second floor of the wooden house, Lul saw his father, Zalen Mu, the real owner of this oasis, and immediately said. Zalen Mu's wrinkled face revealed a hint of smugness, and then he said, I knew that cunning merchant must have left something good for his lowly seed. Is it original, father? Hearing his father mention it again, Lul immediately flattered him with his guess, hoping to be praised by his father. Because in his opinion, since you revived the Zalen Sword Tower, it must be relying on original. But Zalen Mu didn't respond immediately but fell into a brief silence until Lul thought his father was going to scold him for being a fool, and a look of fear appeared in his eyes as he looked at his father. Then the voice in the room sounded again, there may be original, but there must be something else. Like a treasure map or something else. Did his Zhou Xingjing invest any original? Zalen Mu frowned slightly and questioned Lul. Hearing this sudden question, Lul was subconsciously startled, and some cold sweat broke out on his forehead as he quickly recalled the scene he saw at the time. Still somewhat uncertain, he said, No, father, it's still like a desert there, without a trace of green. Hearing the reply, Zalen Mu was relieved, and his brows turned moist. This lowly merchant's son will definitely die. If that old thing left him original, he might barely be able to revive a Zalen Sword Tower. Otherwise, he would definitely invest the original into Zhou Xingjing, at least to have some water to drink. And a Zalen Sword Tower can absolutely not withstand the blood. Zalen Mu's eyes narrowed. He seemed very pleased with his deduction and even delighted to have confirmed your death date. Father, you are truly wise, Lul hurriedly said, but Zalen Mu didn't seem to appreciate it. Instead, he seemed not to have heard it and began to think again. After a brief silence, he finally looked at Lul again. You don't need to go see tomorrow. With a Zalen Sword Tower, an ordinary knight of blood will no longer take his life. I'm going to the inner city and won't be back until tomorrow. You stay in the oasis and have the slaves dig out a kill wall that is twice as wide and twice as high as usual to protect against the blood. Zalen Mu instructed. Lul listened and hurriedly nodded, but a smile secretly appeared on his face. After his father left, the oasis was his own world. He recalled how much fun he had last time his father went out. Now he couldn't help but want to grab his whip and rush into the slave pile, to whip those female slaves for fun. Zalen Mu didn't pay attention to Lul but was putting on an expensive wool coat. While pondering, as a slave owner for generations, Zalen Mu's family was in the inner city, so his news was naturally well informed. A few days ago, he noticed that the lords in the inner city were hoarding food. This was often a sign of danger because the oases in the outer city were the main food-producing areas. Hoarding food, if it wasn't that His Majesty the monarch was short of mines and needed to go to war with other city-states, it meant that the oases in the outer city would suffer large-scale disasters. Which meant that this time the blood might not be simple. Perhaps the astrologer lords in the inner city had said something and he had to find out, but even if the night of blood was going to be even more bitter, it wasn't a big deal. Zalen Mu thought to himself, at most, I'll buy a few more slaves to sacrifice, or prepare something else. I can definitely get through it. I'm sorry, master. Milia was late getting up. Just as you were about to walk out the door again, you heard rustling sounds behind you, followed by Milia's voice, obviously trembling. Turning around, you saw that Milia's clothes were somewhat disheveled, obviously from rushing out of bed. One side of the neckline of her top was high, covering her delicate collarbone, while the other side was low down to her chest. Just in time, you're awake. Come outside with me to pick original stones. Pick original stones? Before she could once again marvel at your kindness in not blaming her, a slave who had gotten up late, Milia was somewhat stunned by these words. Such precious things as original stones. How could they possibly be picked up? You naturally didn't avoid the topic because of the existence of the slave runes. It can be made 100% certain that Milia will keep this secret well for herself. Still extremely hungry, you didn't say much for the time being. You just pushed open the door, and Milia followed closely behind with a puzzled expression. Stepping outside, you first looked around to confirm a desert wolf in the distance. After confirming that Ruller or anyone else wasn't around, you pointed to an area for Milia. You are in charge of this area. Pick up the raw stones in those bones. Raw stones in the bones. A trace of confusion flashed across Milia's face, then she looked at the skeletons with worry, and then at your face. Milia looked at the raw stone in disbelief, and after picking it up, she hurried to look for other skeletons. Soon, she once again looked with astonishment at another pile of bones, still with a raw stone, buried alone in the sand. It must be the master's kindness that moved the oasis god. This must be the oasis god's blessing. Milia began to automatically imagine, and also thought of the poems once sung by the bards. The oasis god has blessed many great monarchs, and now the oasis god has also begun to bless my kind master. Looking at you again, there was not only gratitude but also a hint of awe and expectation. The master will become a great monarch in the future. At this moment, the future great monarch is throwing bones at the desert wolf. Go, go, go. You picked up a rib from the skeleton and threw it hard at the distant figure. To ensure that no one was nearby, he was always vigilant, but no one was seen. The desert wolf that was originally staying far away was getting closer and closer. I didn't expect this desert wolf to be so dishonest. It actually came over to sniff the bones in the oasis. These skeletons have been buried in the sand for who knows how long before they came out of the ground. There's no meat at all. I really don't know what's so good to smell. To ensure your safety, you decided to scare away the desert wolf, but unexpectedly, you threw it very accurately. It just hit the wolf's head. Oh, the desert wolf let out a pitiful whimper, turning around quickly and pitifully. Only then did you realize that the desert wolf was limping, and didn't see a little chicken. It's just a mother wolf with a missing leg. You guessed in your heart that it was probably driven out of the wolf pack because of its disability. It's lucky to survive even one night, seeing the mother wolf with the missing leg disappear without a trace. You were relieved and started searching the last few piles of bones. Finally, you found another one among them, the 17th raw stone. You lowered your head and picked up the last raw stone. Joy surged on your face. A total of 17 raw stones were found in the remains of 137 skeletons. It was truly a great harvest. You shook the burlap bag in your hand, which made a crisp and pleasant sound. Yesterday there were only 6 raw stones in this burlap bag, but now it has more than doubled. Looking at Milia's side again, you saw her walking while using her rolled-up robe to hold the raw stones she had picked up. Her pair of chopstick-like slender legs trembled as she walked towards the next pile of bones. It seemed quite difficult. The area allocated to Milia should be smaller, but you estimated that there would be about 10 raw stones or more. One night's harvest can reach at least 27 in total. If there is this level of raw stone harvest again tomorrow, then it will definitely be enough to restore the other 2. Zalen Sword Tower ruins on your oasis. 3 Zalen Sword Towers. This will be extremely considerable. Decent clothes and enough food to satisfy your appetite. You can even renovate your wooden house to make it look decent enough. These are all cheap. Of course, this is only for slave owners with an oasis. For those located in the middle class of freemen, it is not the case. You remembered your original father saying that the income of most middle-class freemen does not exceed 33 raw stones per year. In fact, most freemen still use bartering as a means of trading. Perhaps they have never even touched a raw stone in their entire lives. But the thought of a poor man suddenly becoming rich only flashed in your mind for a moment. He recalled his original father, how he died, and how his oasis turned into ruins. That was during a blood night not long ago. There were an unusually large number of skeletons. It was that blood night that completely turned you from the son of a barely decent slave owner into a down-and-out slave owner about to be slaughtered. So what about this blood night? Although the probability is very small, it is still possible that it will come like the previous one. You cannot slack off but must go all out. Make thorough preparations. Don't let carelessness cause a setback. Be cautious. Of course, I need to redouble my efforts to quickly unlock the 50-point settlement reward, while continuing to be a nominal, actually frugal slave owner, spending the orc stones wisely. And in this desolate desert, where the camera's not watching, the dangers aren't just the skeletons crawling out of the ground, or other undead creatures. There are also people like my neighbor Zalamu, who are eyeing me covetously. Whenever people gather in a society, people are always more terrifying. Especially in this ignorant, backward, and cruel era. A slave society where living people are used as tools and treated like livestock. This world always makes Lin En feel extremely uneasy. If I want to eliminate this unease and enjoy life with peace of mind, I have to quietly accumulate strength and then blow up this world. Store up provisions, delay becoming king, and work hard secretly. Then give the rest of the world a little surprise. While pondering the next course of action after solving survival and basic needs, Milia walked over, her face filled with genuine joy. Master, these are orc stones. So many orc stones. She seemed to be genuinely pleased that her master was able to obtain so many orc stones under the protection of the oasis god. Well done, Milia. Lin En looked at Milia. He glanced at the orc stones held in her robe, and his eyes lit up. There seemed to be more than he had imagined. The number of orc stones seemed to be more than he had estimated. He counted the orc stones one by one into the burlap sack. There were actually 13 in total. He estimated that the total number of sea grains would not exceed 300, but he had obtained 30 orc stones. According to the frugal slave owner icon, which said there's a 10% chance of obtaining one, he was quite lucky. Wait, Lin En was not overwhelmed by the joy of the harvest. After clarifying his goals just now, he became quite rational instead. He discovered a blind spot. How could it be less than 300? Last night, just before blowing out the red candle, he heard the soul-slaying sword tower attack far more than 300 times, and it had been firing continuously all night. Walking to the sword tower, Lin En discovered new damage to the tower body again. Although it wasn't serious, it was enough to prove that the sword tower had been attacked, constantly attacked. But skeletons still got close. It seems that the accuracy of this soul-slaying sword tower is not high. No wonder it attacked probably thousands of times all night, but only solved less than 300 small skeletons. The soul-slaying sword tower can be strengthened to improve its accuracy. As far as Lin En knew, strengthening required extremely expensive orc stones, and you had to ask the highly respected elementalists in the inner city. But probably even if you went, they wouldn't come. All kinds of relationship networks were intricate and complicated. Unless you integrated into them and gained recognition, you would have the opportunity to contact the elementalist masters. Or, to put it more bluntly, only by being someone's dog could you avoid being strangled. It seems that if he wants to solve this problem, he can only repair the remaining 2 soul-slaying sword tower ruins tonight. Anyway, if he doesn't fix them today, he'll have to do it tomorrow. Tossing out an orc stone, Lin En threw it into the soul-slaying sword tower. After a night of consumption, the light sphere at the top of the soul-slaying sword tower was almost extinguished. Its original energy was insufficient, and after throwing in the orc stone again, Lin En clearly felt a wonderful feeling, as if it had life. After the second investment, the soul-slaying sword tower became familiar with him. This feeling allows me to control the attack target of the soul-slaying sword tower, instead of simply locking on and attacking automatically. How wonderful! Patting the soul-slaying sword tower, Lin En turned his head to look at Milia, only to see Milia walking back and forth in the area he had just already searched. Milia, come back, I've already searched there. But Milia heard Lin En's call, but did not immediately return to Lin En's side. Instead, she quickly ran to a pile of sea grain, bent down, and stuck out her little butt, as if picking up something. Then she hurried back towards Lin En, her face somewhat anxious, as if she was afraid of being misunderstood by Lin En, and hurried to say, "Master, I found another orc stone there. It was buried in the sand." "There's more?" Lin En lowered his head. Just then, Milia opened her clenched little hand. An orc stone was in the palm of her hand. Sure enough, there was another orc stone. In a desert not covered by fertile soil, everything is flowing all the time, just like the proverb of this world says, one cannot step into the same sand pile twice. It seems that it was because he spoke too late, so the sand had already covered some of the orc stones that had fallen deeper. Milia is so meticulous that she can even find the hidden orc stones. This reminded Lin En of the meticulous entry on Milia's illustration. It seems that the illustration can not only allow him to see the ratings and information, but also help him make the best use of people's talents. Very good, Milia. Go see if there are any others. Maybe you can find more. Lin En raised his hand and touched Milia's little head, and Milia immediately showed an expression of enjoyment. Squinting slightly, I need to quickly teach Milia something to increase the positive entries and unlock points. Watching Milia's back, Lin En pondered, but still couldn't think of what to teach her. To be effective quickly, if all else fails, I'll have to go to the slave market tomorrow. To buy a few slaves to boost the numbers, but that's such a waste. Immediately, Lin En immediately thought of another last resort plan, preparing for the worst. However, just then, a fierce wolf howl rang out. Lin En frowned, immediately looking in the direction of the sound, wondering if it was that lame wolf going crazy, but he saw that the direction the distant mother wolf was howling was actually towards the road leading to the inner city. Curious, Lin En turned his head and followed the mother wolf's gaze. A figure appeared in Lin En's field of vision, not Lulu, but another somewhat familiar face. "Milia, stop picking." Lin En first said it loud enough for Milia to hear, then looked at the elevated platform below. At the sound of building his own oasis, a light carriage that looked very expensive was embroidered with some very aesthetically pleasing curved patterns, with a two-humped camel standing beside it, constantly and slowly shifting its upper and lower jaws, then rubbing them together forcefully, as if ruminating. Searching his memory, Lin En finally remembered this person's identity, another one of his neighbors. The only son of that widow's family, his name seemed to be Kalier. The original owner hadn't had no dealings with Kalier before, but had never been paid attention to. Every time he tried to strike up a conversation, he was met with a look of disgust. An arrogant guy. Probably not here like Lulu, trying to see if I'm dead or not, and he also came from the mainland. Mostly just passing by, and happened to notice the changes to my oasis. Contact itself is a torment. Continue, Milia. After saying that to Milia, Lin En looked at the lame mother wolf, who seemed to feel Lin En's gaze. The lame mother wolf wagged her tail, lowered her head and took a few steps forward, then seemed to remember something, was a little scared, and then ran far away completely. Watching the direction the mother wolf disappeared, Lin En scratched his head. This mother wolf feels so dog-like. He took out a primal stone and walked to the well. Save where you should, spend where you should. Although I can't waste primal stones for my own enjoyment right now. But I can completely satisfy basic needs. If I don't drink water again today, I'll probably be thirsty enough to pass out tomorrow. Putting in a primal stone will maintain the water source for 5 days. Putting in more won't increase the number of days. But it can have a more significant impact on the oasis, from a dry desert to producing some moisture, then to becoming moist mud. Even becoming fertile land, but right now all I need is to be able to drink water. Even if there is fertile land, it's a waste without enough manpower to cultivate and plant. Looking at some flour residue on the edge of the well, these are the traces left yesterday when scraping off the remaining water droplets on the well wall in order to knead the flour into dough. Thinking about it, it's really embarrassing. A primal stone went in, and after a moment, a cracking sound came from the bottom of the well. Immediately afterwards, the sound of flowing water rang out. Shaking down the bucket, Lin En caught a full bucket of clear well water, not having time to get anything else. He lay directly on the bucket and swallowed large gulps. The sweet well water finally moistened Lin En's throat and flowed into his abdomen. A burst of coolness. Finally, there's water, and it's a continuous supply of well water. There's so much water anyway, it will dry up again after 5 days. I definitely can't drink it all by myself. Why not make good use of this water, like taking a shower to feel good, and also cleaning Milia's body thoroughly? Maybe it can also increase the bonding progress. Thinking of this, Lin En couldn't help but turn his head, and looked at Milia's dirty face, while opening the slave owner's handbook in his mind again. When he saw Milia's illustration again, Lin En was a little surprised. He didn't expect Milia's rating to have changed significantly again in just one night. Slave Milia, number 1 year 0, adult. Bonding progress 12%, non-negative entry, pain and numbness -77. Psychological trauma from losing her mother -36, security dependence heavy -10, positive entry. Scholar worship +30. True scholar +3, hunger +3, slave owner heavy dependence +7, special entry, +100. Overall score, 27 + 7 = 34 points, Slave Milia. The base score increased by only 4 points, from 23 points directly to 27 points. At first glance, the main reason is still due to the bonus. But this 4-point increase is not simple. Milia's security dependence is more severe. In theory, points should be deducted. But because of the addition of a slave owner's heavy dependence, there was actually a 4-point increase. Slave owner's heavy dependence. What the hell? Slave owner heavily dependent. This slave is very afraid of losing their slave owner. Even more afraid of becoming someone else's slave. With a thought, Lin opened the introduction of the magnetic strip. This isn't some kind of Stockholm syndrome as one business guest, but for completely different reasons. After a moment of thought, Lin suddenly understood. With this magnetic strip, it's probably all thanks to the contrast with others, that is, other slave owners and the almost universal, inhumane exploitation of slaves in this world. He has always chosen to treat slaves kindly, not as livestock or discarded objects, but as real people. That's why this magnetic strip appeared. So in the future, if he treats all his slaves kindly, will each of them be able to have this magnetic strip? Wouldn't his rating soar? Lin guessed in his heart, but he can't use it to verify for the time being. Then he looked at the heavily dependent on security again. These two magnetic strips seem to have some kind of correlation, forming a positive feedback regulation. An increase in one will also lead to an increase in the other. Although Lin can benefit as long as the sum of the two keeps increasing, he actually wants to find a way to eliminate this heavy dependence on security. This would instantly free up a lot of rating points. He can slowly study these magnetic strips later. He feels that this illustrated handbook can give him so much help, and there are too many things worth exploring. Lin stroked his chin and pondered for a while, but he didn't have many clues. He can only slowly summarize experience from practice, and then gradually apply the knowledge gained back to practice. Milia, come and have a drink of water. Lin stopped looking at the slave owner's handbook in his mind and refocused his attention on Milia. Hearing Lin's call, Milia walked over somewhat forlornly. I'm sorry, master. Milia couldn't find more primeval resources. Milia's small hands clutched at the corner of her clothes as she walked to Lin and lowered her head, rubbing the poor quality burlap fabric. This was actually expected because according to the probability and the number of seashells, his harvest this time was already somewhat excessive. Hearing Milia's apologetic voice and seeing her pitiful appearance again, Lin patted Milia's head again. It's okay. Go make some sand cakes. You know how, right? This time, turn all the remaining flour into sand cakes. Hearing that Lin didn't blame her and even gave her a new task, Milia's original worries instantly disappeared. She regained her energy. Watching Milia leave, Lin began to fetch water. He poured a large amount of well water, bucket after bucket, into the large pottery vat. There was actually more than one pottery vat in the house, but the other one had been idle for a long time. This time, one could be used to store water, and the other could be used to take a cold bath. After filling the water vat in the house, Lin moved the other pottery vat outside, right next to the well. Since it was for bathing, there was no need to fetch water and walk so far. He had just moved the large pottery vat into place, and the surrounding scenery had already begun to change. A small area of open ground centered on Zhou Xingjing had turned into sandy loam. A larger area had become somewhat moist and was no longer purely shifting sand. As long as he steadily invested primeval resources every day, this revived soil would continue to exist. If he invested more, it would expand, and even meadows and fertile soil would appear. Lin drew water bucket after bucket. Easier said than done. This is the sand cake made by Milia. Milia was obviously a little uneasy, and then carefully handed the sand cake to Lin. This sand cake is made too well. Lin saw the sand cake, which was made much better than he could make. Each white sand cake was covered with a uniform tan color. Just looking at it, you could feel what they call the Maillard reaction. Lin, this can be said to be almost perfect. Very good, Milia. Your sand cake looks very delicious. Lin didn't skimp on his praise, and Milia's face showed a relieved expression. Does Milia have a cooking talent, or is it because of the bonus of the attentive magnetic strip? He must cultivate it if he has the opportunity in the future. Maybe it can even add a magnetic strip to him. It's a pity that he definitely doesn't have this opportunity now. He has to think of another way to quickly increase the effective magnetic strip. There were many sand cakes. In the end, more than half were left. After storing them in pottery jars, Lin couldn't wait to jump into the large pottery vat filled with water. Lightly splashed well water overflowed from the vat and sprinkled on the desert, quickly seeping away without a trace. At this time, the scorching sun had stabilized overhead. In this extremely hot climate, getting into the cool water made Lin feel refreshed all over. Ah, comfortable. Milia will scrub for master, it will be cleaner. While enjoying the comfort of the moment, Milia's voice suddenly sounded. The blush on her face hadn't faded yet, naturally because she saw some of Lin's unintentional details, and the masseuse that's very enjoyable. Lin unreservedly felt Milia's warm little hands sliding over his body. She only remembered this kind of gentleness after she had acute gastroenteritis once, and experienced it from a nurse. Nurse! Lin suddenly thought of something. Could he make Milia a nurse? No, he doesn't need an ordinary nurse. He needs a nurse who can provide first aid. After all, he can't guarantee that he won't have accidents. If he can teach Milia first aid knowledge, it might save his life at a critical moment. And fortunately, he has knowledge in this area. Lin En still remembered it very clearly, and the knowledge in this area was not complicated, so it could be mastered with a little training. For example, how to deal with fainting caused by heavy metal poisoning, how to stop bleeding by pressing during massive hemorrhage and the Heimlich maneuver, as well as artificial respiration. Without continuing to indulge in the cool enjoyment, Lin En walked out of the water tank. Preparing to return to the wooden house, carefully prepare the teaching content for a while, and strive to use the clearest way. Let Milia learn as soon as possible so as to generate a new entry. At the same time, Lin En also let Milia wash your body well. Hearing the sound of water, Lin En looked back. But Milia was actually wearing that coarse linen robe and got into the water. Do you take a bath with your clothes on? Master, I want to wash my clothes by the way. Milia still didn't dare to look up, looking at Lin En, who was quite frank at this time, her face flushed. Okay. Lin En naturally guessed what the real reason was, looking at the shy Milia. He suddenly discovered a problem that he hadn't noticed before, why he didn't avoid it at all. Taboo swinging around, and not feeling ashamed? Thinking carefully, Lin En suddenly realized that it seemed that he is gradually really seeing Milia as a tool or a pet. Could it be? Is this social existence determining social consciousness? Is the slave alienated into a tool and livestock by this slave society? Once a free man becomes a slave, will he accept this new identity with peace of mind? And since I live in this world, isn't it the same being alienated too? As a modern person's concept, it is also inadvertently. Has it been subtly transformed into the way of this world? I didn't expect that traveling through a world would have such details. Gradually being assimilated by a world. Novels, movies, and TV series have never mentioned this. Interesting. If you don't want to become those ignorant and cruel people in your cognition, indigenous people of another world, it seems that the only way is to follow their own wishes. Change this world into the way you expect. Master. Somewhat surprised, Milia's skin is so white and delicate, plus the one on her body. Although tattered but clean slave robe, it makes her even more cute. If you ignore Milia's face, extending to the neck, the marks are no different from the kind of girl next door who is full of protective desire. Taking the clothes, she found that she was no longer wet at all, and there was still a trace of warmth. Wearing clean clothes no longer as uncomfortable as before. Sticky, indescribable discomfort. Very good. Milia, next I have to teach you something. If I am about to die one day, you need to use this method to save me, understand? Die. After saying that, Lin En began to teach the method of stopping bleeding by pressing in case of massive hemorrhage. But he didn't realize that there were tears in Milia's eyes. Will the master die? What will happen without the master? Milia looked at Lin En. Even though the vents kept blowing in heat waves, she only felt like she had fallen into an ice cellar. Milia? After talking for a long time, Lin En realized at this time. Milia was a little abnormal. She seemed to be distracted. A call immersed Milia in anxiety, and then she regained her senses. Did you understand? Lin En looked at Milia in confusion, but the next moment he heard Milia. For no reason at all, she answered irrelevantly. Master, can you not die? I usually don't die. I mean, it's possible. For example, if I am injured and bleed a lot, then you need use this method to keep me from dying. Lin En replied in a daze. And when Milia heard this, her eyes instantly changed from dim to bright. If I learn this, the master will not die. That's right. Why does it feel weird to say this, as if I will inevitably be threatened with ice death one day? And Milia has become her own resurrection armor? Seeing Milia concentrating this time, Lin En repeated it again, rolled up his sleeves, and demonstrated which places are the common arteries, proximal and distal ends, and countermeasures for various situations. For example, when to raise the injured area above the height of the heart. After teaching all the knowledge he remembered, Lin En asked Milia to repeat it again. See where there are omissions. And what Lin En didn't expect was that Milia actually remembered everything quite clearly. As expected of someone with a math ability of 30 points, you know. In this ghost place, I actually absorbed new knowledge so quickly. Lin En thinks this learning ability is fully capable of teaching some hardcore knowledge, such as physiology and mathematics. Very good, Milia, you did very well. Looking at Milia, Lin En couldn't help but praise her. Milia's face overflowed with shyness. Finally, Lin En continued teaching. For coma situations similar to sudden death and fainting, Milia still quickly memorized them. Okay, now I'm going to teach you what to do if I choke. Stand up, Milia. At that time, you will put your hands together below my chest like this, and then... Lin En didn't feel any fluctuation, and looked down. Only then did he confirm the specific position. In Milia's situation, she couldn't even tell the front from the back of her clothes. I have to supplement her nutrition later. Here. And then, finally, Lin En began to demonstrate the standard movements of the Heimlich maneuver. Well, Milia's face turned red again. Feeling the occasional impact on her small butt, it was a little painful. But there was a kind of inexplicable feeling. Very good, Milia. Lin En once again asked Milia to repeat everything she had learned, without exception. She mastered everything very well. And outside the house, the sky had once again turned into a rosy glow. Time flies so fast, but there's still time to teach the last item. Artificial respiration. Press here and then press 30 times. Like me, press and count. Then, Milia felt the pair of warm hands on her chest, trying hard to remember. Suddenly, she felt a gentle force, lifted her chin. Lin En's lips met hers and began to blow air. In an instant, Milia's mind went blank. Milia, have you learned it? This is called artificial respiration. After demonstrating the last step, Lin En first looked at the sky outside the house. Then asked Milia, Master. Milia woke up as if from a dream. Like just now, quickly do it again. Lin En was a little anxious. He originally planned to repair the other two sand spirit sword towers. In this way, the coverage of the sword tower will be greatly improved. The original income will also greatly increase tomorrow morning. Switching positions, Lin En lay on the bed, feeling Milia's little hands pressing. It only felt like a cat scratching. His strength is too small, but I don't really need to be saved by artificial respiration. In short, it's good to have learned it. Hearing Milia start counting, Lin En didn't let her continue demonstrating. Milia, you can recall more of what I said in your mind. He got up and walked to the door of the house, turned his head and said to Milia, while still not forgetting to emphasize. This is very important. Yes, Master. Milia quickly nodded, watching Lin En leave, and stretched out her small tongue. She licked her lips, still retaining that wetness. As soon as she opened the door, Lin En saw that the wolf was actually climbing onto. The water tank filled with water by the side was drinking bathwater, ignoring the desert wolf. Lin En took the bag and quickly walked to the other two sand spirit sword towers. He finally completed the repair before the arrival of the leafwood. Success. Lin En felt that today was quite fulfilling. And quite tired. After handing over those first aid knowledge, I don't know Milia. Whether tomorrow can bring him a brand new entry. And the attack range of the 3 sand spirit sword towers reached 3 times the original. I wonder if the harvest can also reach 3 times. Is it more or less? The night is as dark as ink. Stars glittered, the sound of sand swords powering up over the oasis. Rising and falling. Lin En fell into a deep sleep, but Milia in the darkness opened her eyes wide. In her mind, she was constantly replaying the first aid knowledge Lin En taught, the distal end of the common carotid artery. Milia didn't know what those words meant, but she could clearly remember where Lin En demonstrated the distal and proximal ends were. From the moment she lay down, she had recalled it countless times in her mind, repeatedly familiarizing herself with it. Now, she had completely memorized these obscure pieces of knowledge. Suddenly, a feeling of unease surged into Milia's heart. Is Master dead now? Quietly turning over, Milia looked at Lin En beside her. Confirming that he was still breathing, she was still a little afraid. Although he was still breathing, it didn't necessarily mean he wasn't dead. The thought arose and Milia became increasingly worried. That's right, she could use that last method. If she used that method, at this moment Milia had a sudden inspiration and thought of a way to eliminate her unease. Regardless, she would use what she knew first. But afraid of disturbing Lin En, Milia chose to omit the initial compression steps. Gently bringing her lips closer, because her mind was blank at the time, Milia was now using what she believed was the correct method. Even if he died, it would be okay now, right? After a gentle kiss, Milia was finally completely relieved and turned over, She peacefully fell asleep. Chapter 10. I tested my number of members. Milia felt her little but being used to block a hole, pressed against by a wooden stick that had broken into the room. Feeling uncomfortable, she drowsily opened her eyes and immediately turned over. Looking at Lin En beside her, she reached out a small hand and carefully placed it under Lin En's nose, who was still fast asleep, feeling the steady and warm breath gliding across her fingertips. Only then did Milia feel relieved. The feeling of reassurance welled up from the bottom of her heart. Master is still alive this year. A faint hint of joy appeared on Milia's face. Finally, she tiptoed out of bed. The morning light had just begun to brighten, and Milia, shivering from the desert cold, hurriedly put on the coarse linen cloth she had washed yesterday and moved the large water tank. Just as she was about to go out to inspect the raw stones in the seabed valley, Milia caught sight of that wooden stick in the corner of her eye. It was placed on the edge of the old wooden table. The wooden stick, wasn't Master holding it close to his body? Looking back at Lin En, who was still asleep, Milia's eyes were filled with confusion. Not long after, as the desert gradually began to warm up, Lin En finally woke up and opened his eyes. His pupils, which were originally somewhat unfocused, Lin En immediately began to check the slave owner's handbook in his mind. The ancient handbook flipped open, quickly going from the title page to the first page. He originally planned to see how much more he needed to reach in order to unlock his 50-point settlement reward in time, so he could plan for the day. Should he quickly go and buy some slaves to make up the numbers, or should he educate and train Milia? But when he saw the score on Milia's profile picture, Lin En was shocked. The overall score was 40 plus 16, equals 50 points. It was actually 50 points. So fast. Lin En immediately looked closely at it. After looking at it, he realized that the way to reach 50 points was somewhat unexpected. A new entry did appear, but it only added 1 point. Inexperienced first aider. +1. For people in danger, he may be able to do something. But he could only do something. And the real scoring items were actually those two again. Severe dependency entry. Security dependency went from 10 to 11. Slave owner dependency actually went from +7 to +14. The slave owner dependency entry doubled the score. All of a sudden, it directly added a full 6 points, plus the bonus of the bound progress, reaching 148. Only then did it just barely pass 50 points. But why did the change in this severe dependency entry become so big? Could it be yesterday? Yesterday, he was busy educating and training Milia in first aid knowledge. Later, he was in a hurry to repair the Sand Spirit Arrow Tower and didn't pay close attention. Recalling carefully, Lin discovered some clues. Master, can you please learn this or you will die? The master won't die. Recalling Milia's eyes and words at the time. It sounded inexplicable at the time, but now I belatedly realized that. It was I who inadvertently triggered Milia's worry about my death, and she is very dependent on me. By a strange twist of fate, Milia's dependence on me has deepened. On second thought, isn't this the so-called emotional blackmail, what others call Fuama? I didn't expect that I would accidentally become a scumbag. In an instant, Lin felt that he had a new understanding of how to improve such entries. He also had some different ideas. After thinking for a while, Lin changed his mind. The pages of the slave owner's handbook turned rapidly to the second to last page. And when he saw the words on it, Lin's eyes widened instantly. 50-point slave owner. Rating reward settlement completed. Reward, original 40. Reward, Sand Spirit Sword Tower. Enhancement guide. Sand Spirit Sword Tower Enhancement Guide. Resources that can be consumed. To enhance the Sand Spirit Sword Tower. Is the enhancement of the Sand Spirit Sword Tower the kind of enhancement I'm thinking of? The kind that requires spending thousands of yuanshi as materials, and then spending thousands more yuanshi or even selling dignity. Requesting the intervention of a highly respected elementalist from the inner city to achieve that kind of enhancement. Now that I have mastered the enhancement method of the Sand Spirit Sword Tower, won't the consumption be equivalent to a 50% discount? Moreover, the enhancement of the Sand Spirit Sword Tower will no longer be monopolized by others and be subject to others. I can completely control it myself, without having to bow down and integrate into the circle of nobles in the inner city. And I don't need to think about how to sell my dignity every day in order to gain the approval of those superiors. I can enhance the Sand Spirit Sword Tower while standing. And I can also freely create an oasis full of enhanced Sand Spirit Sword Towers. As far as Lin knows, the largest slave owner oasis in the outer city has only 2 enhanced Sand Spirit Sword Towers. No, it's not just that. I'm taking a narrow path. Lin changed his mind. Although I can only enhance the Sand Spirit Sword Tower, and cannot, like a true elementalist, enhance all Yuan energy devices with elemental knowledge and natural talent. But I can also be considered an elementalist. the main strata of the city-state. From top to bottom they are monarch, nobles, slave owners, free people, slaves. And the status of the elementalist is extremely high, like that of an astrologer, slightly higher than the nobles. Yuan energy devices, such as the Sand Spirit Sword Tower, Zhou Xingjing, etc., are the foundation of survival in this world. Without the Sand Spirit Sword Tower, flesh and blood cannot withstand the undead cleansing at night. Without Zhou Xingjing, there is no place in the desert that can support a sufficient population of natural water sources. The sand spirits will die of thirst, but Yuan energy devices have one thing in common, which is that they cannot be manufactured at all. As for what is currently in use, who made this batch of Yuan energy devices is unknown. Because the number is fixed, the price of Yuan energy devices has been increasing, to the point where they are now priceless. It is impossible to manufacture new Yuan energy devices. If you want to develop, you can only improve the role of the limited Yuan energy devices. Therefore, the number of Yuan energy stones is also an indispensable key to the future of the city-state. Therefore, Yuan energy stones have such a lofty status. With this identity blessing, and I am a slave owner, I will definitely be able to obtain more easily more resources and develop my oasis faster. Besides, I can also enhance the Sand Spirit Sword Tower for others and earn 1,000 yuan sure in return. Wouldn't that be great? And there will be who knows how many more settlement rewards in the future. Maybe there will also be enhancement guides for other Yuan energy devices. Lin couldn't help but look at himself at the bottom. 50-point settlement. Original 40, Sand Spirit Sword Tower Enhancement Guide. The next settlement score requires 100. I wonder what good rewards will be next time. Taking out the settlement reward, the original time was held in Ling Wen's hand. The Sand Spirit Sword Tower Enhancement Guide turned into a mysterious rune. It fell on a page in the middle of the entire slave owner's handbook. From a long-term perspective, I have the ability to enhance the Sand Spirit Sword Tower. Graduation is infinite, but even now, having this kind of ability to enhance the sword tower, my original time, is completely insufficient. Originally, I was looking forward to being able to obtain a reward that immediately enhances the strength of the oasis. After all, the blood moon is tonight. Although things didn't go as planned, it's still a good thing. As for tonight's blood moon, how can I ensure everything is foolproof? Should I quickly buy some slaves as defense personnel? I wonder if the original time I harvested last night is enough to buy a few. Ling Wen glanced at the various Sand Spirit Sword Tower enhancement routes that gradually emerged beside him and prepared to close the slave owner's handbook. But just this glance made his heart pound. How is it possible? After looking at it several times, it was still constantly emerging. Ling Wen, who was himself, then guaranteed that he was not mistaken. Sand Spirit Sword Tower Enhancement Guide, Enhancement Direction 1. Sand Spirit Machine Tower, rate of fire increased by 50%, accuracy increased by 50%, power increased by 50%. Consumption, each enhancement route requires 50 units of original time and a clump of shantung. Enhancement Direction 2. Sand Spirit Sniper Tower, accuracy increased by 500%, range increased by 200%, rate of fire decreased by 50%. Consumption, each enhancement route requires 50 units of original time and a clump of shantung. Enhancement Direction 3. Sand Spirit Guardian Tower, durability increased by 1000%. Consumption, each enhancement route requires 50 units of original time and a clump of shantung. Each enhancement route requires only a mere 50 units of original time and a clump of shantung. A clump is the most commonly used unit of weight in the desert, which is the average weight that a single humped camel can carry, about 200 kilograms. The acquisition of shantung is very simple and not expensive. The cost of buying a clump of shantung will not exceed 20 units of original time. In other words, the cost required to enhance the Sand Spirit Sword Tower is actually only 70 units of original time? That's not right. Enhancing the Sand Spirit Sword Tower is not like repairing it, which requires tearing it down and rebuilding it. So, it should still require 20 units of original time. Even so, it is very different from the material cost of thousands of units of original time required to enhance a meta-art formula that Lin En knows. But the fact is right in front of you. Could it be that that group of meta-art formula users collectively lied about the cost of enhancement in order to earn more money? The thought in his heart had already appeared, and then Lin En immediately denied it. Blindly guessing is meaningless. We must seek truth from facts and find out the reason. Faced with this unexpected and bizarre situation, Lin En also decided to change his previous strategy. The water of this meta-art formula is a bit deep. Without understanding the situation, stepping in with 1 foot may drown yourself. Lin En pondered for a long time again, before finally closing the slave owner's handbook. At least I can follow what I thought before. As long as I get Shantung, I can be foolproof before tonight's blood moon. I wonder if the original stones Milia has picked up are enough to buy a clump of Shantung. Moreover, I have to go to the inner city to buy this thing, but I don't even have a camel to ride. I'm afraid I won't make it back in time. Walking off the bed, Lin En walked towards the door, while estimating in his mind that he felt the time was a little tight, and once he couldn't come back. Milia is left alone in the territory. I wonder if she'll encounter any danger. Stepping out, Lin En saw Milia, quickly circling in one direction, picking up raw stones, and the burlap sack in her hand. It seems to have quite a harvest. Is that lame wolf again actually living in the dangerous desert? She is looking around again. Lin En then discovered that the desert wolf from yesterday was squatting at a place far away from Milia, watching Milia's movements, and when Milia gradually approached him, it would actually get up and walk to a further place, keeping a distance. It's not like it's guarding against Milia, but more like it's afraid of scaring Milia. Chapter 11. Jealous Milia. This desert wolf is really quite intelligent. Later he has to go to the city to buy buckets, and he can also bring back better noodles. So he simply took out a pancake, half of which Lin En stuffed into his mouth, and the other half Lin En threw to the desert wolf. Lin En thought in his heart, this wolf looks very intelligent, might as well give it a try. Maybe it can be tamed anyway, the cost can be ignored. This era, there are no domesticated wolves, that is, dogs. The reason is nothing else. Because slaves are much more useful than dogs, but Lin En knows that dogs have more advantages than people. That is vigilance. If you can really tame a wolf, then your oasis will have a good guard. Wolves' perception of danger is much stronger than humans. And this lame female wolf living alone can survive, perhaps better than ordinary desert wolves. Is even more vigilant. Heard a plop, dropped on the sand half of a sand cake. The lame female wolf immediately turned her head and stared at the location of the sand cake, as if thinking. Then, she stood up, pressing her head, 3 legs moving slower and slower, and when she reached the sand cake, she immediately lowered her head and quickly picked up the sand cake. She ran nimbly on 3 legs to her original position. This lame wolf didn't expect to run so fast. Seeing this funny scene, Lin En smiled and then walked towards Milia. Milia, how many raw stones do you have now, master? I only picked up 15 pieces. Milia replied upon hearing Lin En's question. Her voice sounded like a child who had done something wrong. Yeah, 15 pieces, plus the remaining raw stones in my hand. There is no way to ensure that you can buy a bucket without fail and have enough raw stones. For reinforcement and upgrades, to buy a bucket you need at least 20 pieces. Just finished looking for a few piles of bones, but when I looked up, I saw the lame female wolf not far away. Seemed to be gnawing on bones, but on closer inspection it wasn't. I saw the lame female wolf's 2 front paws digging in the sand, and then she took a bite. She actually picked out a raw stone. The next moment, the lame female wolf turned her head and looked over. Man and wolf looked at each other. Lin En was dumbfounded. Damn, could this female wolf smell where there are raw stones? And what Lin En didn't expect even more was, the lame female wolf's tail, which was originally drooping, actually stood up, and even started shaking very awkwardly. Come on, come on. Lin En tried to call out to the lame female wolf, unexpectedly. It really came over, hobbling and limping, and walked to Lin En. Still in a relatively distant place, she lowered her head and put down the raw stone in her mouth. This right, continue. Lin En pointed to the raw stone, and then pointed to those unexplored skeleton bones. The lame female wolf tilted her wolf head, looking at Lin En, and then seemed to guess Lin En's. She immediately turned around and began to sniff with her head lowered. Quickly, she started digging again with her front paws, lowered her head, and another raw stone. This desert wolf can actually smell raw stones, ha ha ha. Good wolf. Can you call it a good dog now? Lin En was overjoyed in his heart. Picking up raw stones is easy, but finding raw stones is difficult. I don't know which bone has raw stones underneath. That's why a lot of time was wasted, and if the lame female wolf, if it can be directly located, plus it's a 3-legged, quickly searching close to the ground. This speed of picking up primal stones and cleaning up the night battlefield is more than just a 10-fold increase. Watching the second primal stone being brought back, Lin En was not stingy. He directly took out a whole piece of desert from the newly packed peach jar, and the lame wolf jumped up. Catching it in mid-air, she swallowed it immediately. Master, be careful, master. Milia, who had been carefully searching for the primal stones, then discovered the lame wolf pouncing on Lin En and immediately ran over, wanting to protect Lin En, or perhaps already prepared to make a big splash. Pressing to execute, but seeing the actual situation, Milia's face immediately revealed a relic. Unbelievable. Oh, it's okay. Now it's not considered a wolf anymore. Of course, Milia, you still need to stay away from it. Lin En looked at Milia and said with a smile on his face, who knows how much of this lame wolf's wildness is still left? What if it suddenly goes crazy? That would be bad. Although now taking the first step in taming, still need to be wary of you. And this time, the lame wolf finished the food in its mouth. Without waiting for Lin En to give an order, it went directly to find the primal stones. Non-stop, Lin En took advantage of the gaps to feed it as a reward. Furthermore, strengthening the reward circuit for this lame wolf. If in the future, this lame wolf can take on the work of picking up primal stones and cleaning up the battlefield, I estimate the sky won't even be bright yet, and all the primal stones can be collected. In this way, there is no need to worry at all that others will discover the abnormality of their oasis. And Milia stood behind Lin En. The expression on her face was somewhat complicated. Master, with this desert wolf, able to pick up primal stones, will it not want me anymore? Milia thought of this, and suddenly a sense of crisis arose. Only then did she regain her senses. Ko lai cam nan duok chik tue vitho dung muoi lam vien gwyn thatch trong tamin. Since it has already taken the first step from wolf to dog, shouldn't it be given a name? Lai fu, wang kai, although expressing my homesickness, but it's a bit old-fashioned. How about calling it Bai Kai? Lin En thought in his heart, feeling that this name was good, with a good meaning, and not cliched. The wealth of this world is naturally the primal stones. Moreover, it is directly tied to survival, a true meaning of wealth. Lin En naturally hoped there would be as many primal stones as possible. Just as he was about to try calling out the name, Luke Nai, Ontachat Ne Thay Tieng Lat Trang Sach Trong Dao. What changes will there be at this time? Lin En immediately looked at the slave owner's handbook, but saw the change was actually in Milia's entry. Only one entry changed, which was the slave owner's loyalty and dependence score. Increasing again? What's going on? Turning his head, he looked at Milia, but saw Milia was bending over and picking up primal stones at a very fast speed. At this time, the temperature of the desert was not high, only just reaching 10 degrees, but Milia's whole body was soaked in sweat. The slave robe clung tightly to her skin, and you could even see drops of sweat sliding from her forehead. What's the situation? Why is she suddenly so eager to pick them up? Could it be? Lin En suddenly thought of something he had just figured out, then looked at Lai Kai again. At this moment, Milia and Lai Kai were like they were in a competition. He immediately understood. Could it be that Milia is jealous? Or jealous of a female dog? Wait a minute. Don't move. Waiting for Milia and the lame wolf to both set their sights on the same primal stone, and were both about to snatch it. Lin En immediately opened. Milia, you're doing very well. Come, Lai Kai. This is yours. Lin En praised Milia, and at the same time gave Lai Kai a bowl of water. Hearing Lin En's words, Milia's face finally showed relief. Returning to the room, Lin En began to count the harvest of this night. 53 primal stones. Milia picked up 21 pieces. The rest were all Lai Kai's credit, plus the reward from the slave owner's handbook. The number of primal stones in hand now is a total of 96 pieces, barely enough. Yesterday consumed the ones in hand. Almost all of the raw stones have been repaired and recharged for the remaining 2 sand spirit sword towers. There are 2 more sand spirit sword towers, but the harvest hasn't doubled. It seems to have reached the limit of passively defending against and killing the Kulu undead, unless we can find a way to actively attract those wandering undead in the desert. But who should we send? Lin En stroked his chin. Can't be me and Milia. This kind of potentially dangerous behavior is a bit too risky. Lin En looked outside the door at Lai Kai, who was kowtowing vigorously, and his hind leg was awkwardly pinned under him as if it were superfluous. Lin En dismissed the idea. He didn't dwell on the problem. The blood moon is imminent. This is the most urgent task. He has to hurry to the inner city in case he can't get back in time. Master, what am I going to learn today? Milia asked, watching Lin En finish with the raw stones. Today you'll stay here and review what I taught you. I'm going to the inner city to buy some things. The inner city? Hearing Lin En's words, a strong worry appeared on Milia's face. Master, can Milia go with you? No. Lin En stood up and stroked Milia's little head. Without delay, he took the bag and walked out the door. Milia, as a slave, is not protected by the law and could be in danger, and the power of the law only protects her life. Disasters are often the most chaotic times. If something happens, I can't protect Milia at all. For the time being, as long as I leave the oasis, I'm still very weak and don't have the terrifying power that nobles do. Turning past the wooden house, he saw Lai Kai sitting on the edge of the oasis, licking his dry fur. He's quite territorial. Lin En smiled faintly and was about to walk towards the road to the inner city, but when he turned his head, he saw a figure, peering not far away. It was still that familiar Bactrian camel, still wriggling there, his cheeks bulging and deflating rhythmically. But the person standing next to it had changed into a full set of clothes, which seemed to be made of a lighter linen. Khalil, son of the widow Milia. Why is this arrogant guy here again today? And it looks like he came specifically to find me. What's his purpose? Lin En frowned, but unexpectedly, he saw Khalil raise his head and speak. Lin En, my mother wants to see you. The widow Milia wants to see me? At this time, Khalil had an arrogant posture, looking at Lin En with an impatient expression. Lin En suddenly felt a little annoyed. This kid Khalil is so annoying. Of course, I can go see Milia. Maybe I can borrow a camel by the way so I don't have to worry about not getting back in time. Moreover, the principle of a close neighbor is better than a distant relative still applies in this land. Besides, I heard that this widow's property is quite amazing, investing at least $3 a day in the surrounding greenery. But I haven't had any previous interaction with this wealthy widow. Why is she suddenly looking for me? Can't be that she suddenly got the urge to entangle herself with me, right? Chapter 12. What bad intentions could a widow have? Lin En had almost forgotten. The smell of soil mixed with grass seeds, like smelling it after a rainstorm. But when he stepped into Milia's oasis, he smelled it again. This is truly worth investing $3 a day to maintain. Looking at the greenness in Milia's oasis, the tender grass, fresh flowers, and even a separate area used to plant some flowers and plants, Lin En was filled with emotion. And the most dazzling thing on the oasis was the fortress made of white boulders not far from the center of the oasis. If I lived in this place, I wouldn't have to worry about the Kulu breaking down the door. Compared with my oasis, this is truly what I imagined an oasis to be. But relying on my thrifty slave owner title to get through the blood moon and then harvest for a while, accumulating enough to make my oasis so lush and green as well. It's not impossible, and Lin En is even starting to look forward to it, when the time comes. In his own little patch of land, plant a coconut tree, with a scene of him under the tree and coconut branches. Moreover, he can completely maximize the effectiveness of Zhou Xingjing. For example, invest 4 primal stones every 5 days. The oasis invests primal stones each time. Can be maintained for 5 days, from investing 1 to investing 3. The irrigable area will also increase accordingly, but when 4 primal stones are invested, the irrigation area will not increase, but some changes will occur, with a certain very small probability. Some exotic flowers and herbs will grow, and if they can be used as spices, then he will make a fortune. But no one in the outer city would take such a gamble, as Lin En knows. Only the inner city, the oases controlled by the nobles, would invest 4 primal stones every 5 days. As for the strengthened Zhou Xingjing, Lin En has never heard of it, and does not know what qualitative change it will have. Perhaps the monarch and the king's court oasis of Destroyer 16th will have the strengthened Zhou Xingjing. Carrier, who was walking in front, looked at Lin En behind him with satisfaction, in his understanding. Lin En must be full of envy, and he thought of Lin En's barren and desolate. The oasis, which is almost the same as the desert, made him feel a sense of superiority, and he raised his chin even higher. Just as he was about to enjoy the superiority in his heart at this moment, Carrier felt a weight on his chest. The thin silk robe was splashed with water, and with a pop, the sound of ceramic shattering rang out, and he then shifted his gaze to look in front of him, corroding the female slave who was knocked to the ground. "I'm sorry. Little master, I'm sorry." The female slave reacted to what had happened, hastily began to clean up the ground, clean up the shattered peach slices, while apologizing to Carrier in horror. "Get out, you lowly slave. This is my most expensive robe." Carrier frowned, patting the water stains on his body. It seems to have just been drawn from the well, the clear well water, because it was taken by the female slave. Has become dirty and smelly. "Yes, little master." The female slave picked up the peach slices as if she had been granted amnesty, picking them up in a hurry. Even though her hands had been cut and were bleeding, she didn't care about the pain, and hurried to the side. To make way for Carrier, Lin En looked at the screen in front of him, and then used a mountain ash farm tool. Laboriously plowing the land, at the same time, not far away from Zhou Xingjing, there were several female slaves. Were busy drawing water into buckets and transporting it to the water tank. Lin En then realized, why are all the slaves in this Milia oasis female slaves? Even plowing the fields is done by female slaves, and in terms of the number of slaves, this is completely insufficient to support this kind of primitive consumption oasis. At least 40 strong men are needed. Male slaves are needed. At the same time, Lin En used his slave owner's handbook. The built-in scoring function, looking at the scores of these female slaves, each of them has a high score. The selling price on the market is probably more than 10 primal stones. No wonder the appearance of each female slave are quite good. Perhaps once they were also the middle class of free people. Is it just to make her life more comfortable so she invested so many primal stones? Looking at the den that had been transformed into a garden, Lin En felt that he might not have guessed wrong. Really? Rich people, what does this woman want from me when she is so rich? Lin En's curiosity arose again at this time. It's impossible that she really wants my body, damn slave. You dirted my clothes, you idiot. At this time, hearing Carrier in front of him, finally tidied up his clothes, and cursed again. Lin En looked at Carrier.